Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for viewing this training today. My name is Mandy Feeks, and I will be the presenter for today's training. I work as a Community Prevention Project Coordinator with ESD 112, and I sit on our Prevent team, which has been in existence since 2003, so just over 20 years now. And if you're not familiar with Prevent, it is a community coalition that formed to increase collaboration and to work with community partners to reduce youth substance use in Southwest Washington. So we provide support and technical assistance all over the ESD 112 region, and we also have a coordinator who works specifically in rural communities throughout Washington. Now, the presentation today is a part of the Friends for Life campaign, which was funded through Washington State Healthcare Authority. And there are a few different parts of the campaign. There are a couple of versions of the presentations. There's a middle school presentation, a high school presentation, and a parent presentation. And the one we'll be reviewing today is the parent presentation. So that is our target audience. And there's lots of information online. Friends for Life was inspired by young people's care for their friends and their instinct to keep one another safe. And when the developers were creating this, they tested a variety of different concepts. They worked directly with youth to understand what messaging would resonate, what imagery would work best for that population. And they ultimately chose a concept that led with empathy and avoided stigmatizing language and avoided any sort of scare tactics. This is being used all over the state of Washington now. There are a few goals for the Friends for Life campaign as a whole. One of the primary goals is to just provide information and build awareness about what illicit fentanyl is and how it's harming our communities. Another goal is to help people to understand what an opioid overdose looks like and to also be knowledgeable about the opioid overdose reversal medication called naloxone. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly for this audience, is to share about prevention strategies that can help teens in your life to avoid opioids, including fentanyl. So again, this is a brief overview of everything that we're going to cover today. We'll start by talking about the basics of opioids and fentanyl, including what you need to know about the overdose crisis in Washington, and then we'll dive into that discussion on the specific prevention strategies that I mentioned. To kick off, let's talk about the basics of opioids. Some of you may already be familiar with this information, and that's okay. I briefly want to touch on the basics so that we all have the same facts for this conversation. And when you think about opioids, you probably think about pain relief, and that's exactly what the definition looks like. So opioids are a type of drug that are used to manage and relieve pain, and they do this by binding to nerve receptors in the brain, spinal cord, and other organs in the body. There are two different types of opioids. We have regulated or legal opioids and unregulated or illicit opioids. So regulated opioids like OxyContin and Vicodin, for example, those are often prescribed following surgeries or after a major injury. They can also be a part of a cancer treatment plan that you're working on with your physician. Whereas unregulated opioids like heroin, for example, those are sold as street drugs. So on the screen in front of you, you can see there is a legal, highly regulated version of fentanyl and an illicit or unregulated version. And for the purposes of today's training, we will be focusing entirely on illicit fentanyl. There are a few key differences to be aware of between regulated and unregulated opioids. And these differences really relate to how and where an opioid is produced and where and by whom it gets distributed. And these measures are designed to keep people safe. So when we look at those regulated opioids, they are highly controlled, manufactured in official labs. So the dosage is very specific and standard. And regulated opioids are prescribed by medical professionals and are dispensed at pharmacies. Unregulated opioids, on the other hand, are uncontrolled. They're manufactured in underground labs, which means the dosage is highly unpredictable and they are sold on the streets. So as you can imagine, a part of what makes unregulated opioids like illicit fentanyl so harmful is that because they're made in that uncontrolled environment, the strength of each batch of pills or even the strength of each individual pill compared to another can vary dramatically. And some pills may contain very little illicit fentanyl, whereas other pills could contain lethal doses. And there is not a way for us to tell them apart You can't tell how much fentanyl is in something by how it looks, how it smells, or how it tastes. And as I mentioned, the main effect of any opioid is pain relief. However, there are side effects associated with use as well. And two of those main side effects are drowsiness or sleepiness and slowed down breathing. And if someone were to take too much of an opioid, they could experience what's called an opioid overdose. And basically, what this means is that a person has more opioids in their system than their body can handle, and that causes their breathing to slow down. Overdoses can come on very quickly and they can be life-threatening. If you were to see somebody overdosing, they would appear to be sleeping, but they cannot wake up, even if they're shaken, even if they're yelled at. And without any sort of intervention, their breathing could stop altogether. Aside from slowed down breathing and sleepiness, there are a few other signs to be aware of. If you were to see somebody overdosing, their skin could look blue, gray, or purple, and this is because they're not getting enough oxygen. They may also appear pale, ashy, or have cool skin to touch. And you could notice blue or ashy white lips or blue or purplish fingernails. Now let's dive in more specifically about fentanyl. Fentanyl is a very powerful, fast-acting opioid. It's about 50 times stronger than heroin and about 100 times stronger than morphine. And illicit fentanyl is sold on the streets or on social media, usually in the form of a pill or powder. And we'll share a couple of examples so you can see what they look like. But illicit fentanyl can be pressed into pills that look just like prescription pills, like Oxycontin, Adderall, Xanax, or Percocet, for example. But these pills are fake and they're laced with fentanyl and they're nearly impossible to distinguish from a real prescription pill that they are designed to resemble. In powder form, they are frequently mixed into other illicit drugs like cocaine or MDMA. So, because illicit fentanyl is so strong, a really tiny amount can actually lead to an overdose. And because it's fast acting, those overdoses tend to set in very quickly. Something as small as a couple of grains of salt could lead to an overdose. Here are some of the real life examples. These were pulled from the Drug Enforcement Administration of the US, and the intention is to show you how similar a fake fentanyl laced pill looks compared to a real prescription medication. And just think about this in the context of you don't have the real prescription pill to compare it to or look at. So if you were to only see the fake pill, it's really similar in shape, size, and color, and that makes it nearly impossible to identify as a counterfeit version of the pill. This is affecting us in Washington. So this is a little bit about what you need to know related to the overdose crisis. And this isn't just Washington, it's all over the US. So across the entire country, illicit fentanyl and other powerful additives are making street drugs more unpredictable and harmful. And unfortunately, the rate of youth overdose has increased in recent years, and illicit fentanyl is a big part of the reason why. However, what I want you to know is that most teens are not actively seeking out or are knowingly experimenting with opioids. In fact, most young people are reporting that they don't experiment with pills of any kind. And the overall number of Washington youth who have died from a fentanyl overdose remains relatively low, but we'd like to keep it that way. And still, one life lost is too many. And because illicit fentanyl is so harmful, it's really important for everyone, teens included, to understand what the risks of illicit fentanyl are and to know how to avoid it. And fentanyl is hurting the people that we care about. So just by being informed and educating others, we can help to keep one another safe. So thank you for being here today. What can you do to help your teen? There's a lot that you and I and schools can do to educate teens in your life about illicit fentanyl and to prepare them to avoid any pressure that they may face to experiment with drugs. And so some of the things that you may do are focus on understanding potential risk factors, set expectations with your teen, talk to them about fentanyl, teach them practical refusal skills, get to know who they're spending time with, so know who their friends are, get to know their friends' parents or caregivers, and help them to build healthy relationships from a young age. As young as possible is best. Let's discuss these each in a little bit more detail. So we'll start with understanding risk factors. Among the risk factors that may contribute to teens experimenting with prescription pills, these tend to be the most common. Mental health, things like stress, anxiety, or depression can cause people to seek out pills to self-medicate. Those experiencing mental health challenges are also more likely to use alone, which can be really dangerous. Physical pain, if your teen were to have been injured, they may seek out pills to self-medicate or peer pressure. So teens experimenting in social settings with their peers where there's drinking, pills, or other drugs available. Some teens do knowingly take fentanyl, but in the most recent data that we pulled from the Healthy Youth Survey in Washington, we have seen that less than 1% of teens are using prescription pills as a way to get high. But factors like mental health challenges and physical pain may be the reasons that they've sought out pills that weren't prescribed to them. And this, of course, is going to increase their risk of coming into contact with illicit fentanyl. Expectations. We are very happy to hear that most teens say they trust their parents or caregivers more than anyone else when it comes to information and advice about not taking drugs. And they really consider you the expert. So what you say matters to them. I mentioned this before, but the majority of teens who encounter fentanyl do so accidentally by mistaking fake pills for real prescription pills. And they typically access these pills on social media apps like Snapchat, or they may obtain it from a friend, and that friend may or may not know if a pill has illicit fentanyl in it. And so, one of the most important expectations that you can set with your teen is to not take or share pills that have not been prescribed to them. It's very important that teens know that any pill that wasn't prescribed to them by a doctor and picked up directly at a pharmacy could contain fentanyl and it could put them at risk of harm or even an overdose. So, reinforcing that it is never safe or acceptable to take or share pills that are not theirs is something that we all can do to help teens in our lives stay safe. Talking about fentanyl, just like we're doing today, one of the most powerful ways that you can help teens in your life is just by starting a conversation. Talk about illicit fentanyl, make sure that they have the facts that they need, that they understand the risks. Talking about it is not going to make them more likely to try it. We have actually found that the opposite is true. And keep some of these tips in mind for having a successful conversation. First is setting clear boundaries and expectations. We just talked about that on the previous slide. Second is show that you care and that you're on their side. Start by being open and honest. You can ground your concerns in any shared goals that you have with your teen, like their health, their happiness, their well-being. Third is to prove that you're a reliable source of information. Research has actually suggested that teens are really interested in the why. You may have seen this when they were growing up as well. Why this? Why that? But now it's the why behind, well, why shouldn't I try pills or why can't I share pills? And teens are going to seek out this information no matter what. So if you're not serving as a reliable source of information, they may actually turn to a less reliable source of information to get that. Show that you're attentive to what's going on in their world and their lives. This goes hand in hand with showing that you care. And when you express interest in your children's lives, they're more likely to share with you about what's going on. Help them build realistic refusal skills, which we'll talk about. And even if you believe that your teen would never try a pill, they're still going to encounter some sort of pressure in their life. So refusal skills can work for more than just saying no to drugs. And even if they don't have to use them, it could help a friend who would need it. A few more tips just to help you ensure that the conversation goes well. Pick a time and place that you can both focus. Car rides, meal times, everyday moments. Make sure to ask open-ended questions and really listen. In fact, I'd recommend planning to listen more than you talk. Avoid giving any sort of lecture. Stay calm and non-judgmental. Nothing shuts down a conversation faster than feeling judged. Avoid scare tactics, as the developers for this campaign did. They don't work. Feeling afraid can get in the way of learning and retaining new information. So rather than sharing anything shocking or scary, really focus on being informative. Tell them how much you care. Teens need to know that this conversation comes from a place of love and keep the conversation going. Several short conversations work better than the big talk. but keep checking in and sharing information as often as you can, especially as they grow up. Here are some examples of how to start a conversation, just in case you don't know where to start. We've got some handouts that go over the same information as well, and they're available on the Friends for Life website if you need to access them. But one way to start a conversation could be just asking what your teen knows. Have you heard about a drug called fentanyl? What have you heard? This gives you an opportunity to listen and learn, find out what they already understand, and then you can share what you know. Another good way to start a conversation is by using timely news. So you read an article, saw a video, you heard a report about fentanyl, and you just wanted to talk to your kid about it. And this is an opportunity to also share how you're feeling. Continuing on into the conversation, perhaps a little bit later, you can say something along the lines of, I know a pill might seem safe to take from your friend, but it could cause you harm or lead to an overdose. So this is an opportunity to outline any risks and set expectations around not sharing pills. And to wrap it up, try your best to make yourself a safe and approachable space. Let them know if they ever have any questions, they can come to you. Just remember that at the end of the day, conversations like this do not have to be perfect. It's just important that they're happening. Teaching refusal skills. Refusal skills are defined as practical and concrete ways for teens to either learn to refuse an offer to try a pill or to just avoid a situation altogether. So, sitting down and walking your teens through information like this can help them to decide what they're most comfortable using as far as refusal skill goes in the event that they ever need to use one. And remind them that their friends should not be encouraging them to take unsafe risks or to pressure them to do something they don't want to. But if they were to ever encounter a situation, these are some of the things that they can do. Teach your teen to send a signal. So agree on a code that they can text or call you to come pick them up as soon as possible. It could be an emoji, it could be a code word. Pass the blame. This is one that my parents always used growing up. They said, blame me. I'll be the bad guy to help you get out of any sort of awkward or harmful situation. An example of this could be, my parents would ground me for life if they ever found out. Offer an alternative. This strategy is really about suggesting a different activity. So talk to your teen about something that they love to do. And if they're ever offered to do drugs, they could say, hey, I'd rather go get a bite to eat or take a walk. I'd rather that we go play in the park. Making an excuse. This strategy sounds something along the lines of, I have a big test tomorrow. I have sports practice I can't miss. I've got family coming into town. Just anything to explain why they don't want to try what's being offered. Avoid the situation. Talk to your teens about simply not going to places or hanging out with people that are likely to be trying pills or using other drugs. It could be defining an invitation to a party or just avoiding going to a certain person's house. Be honest. At the end of the day, no is a complete sentence. It is totally okay for your teen to be honest and say, I do not want to try what's being offered, and there's not an explanation that's needed. But of course, this one can be hard in the face of pressure, but it does work. And lastly, teach your teen to be an advocate. Teens care what their friends think. So if they're ever in a position not only to refuse to offer drugs, but they could take it a step further and use their skills to share what they know about the risks of trying pills. And they are not only being an advocate for themselves, but they also have the opportunity to influence others. Relationships. Now, when it comes to supporting your teens, you're not alone. Relationships, connection, and feeling like you belong are some of the most important and powerful protective factors that help to keep people safe. So think about your teen circle of friends as a literal protective force field surrounding them, and the more connection that they have, the better. And although information such as what we're sharing today is really important, those healthy friendships and connections are even more powerful. And so feeling connected to their community, to their friends, to their family, to their school can really reduce the likelihood of experimenting with any sort of substances. Now, I know that you can't control and you aren't responsible for every friend that your teen makes, But what you can do is sit down with them to help them reflect on the qualities that they want in a friend, what values are important to share, and also how they expect to be treated in a healthy friendship. For you, you can get to know the people that they're spending time with and to get to know their friends' parents. And of course, when and where it feels appropriate, feel free to talk to the parent friend groups and share what you know about the risks of fake pills and illicit fentanyl and where teens may be accessing them. Lastly, I want to touch a little bit on naloxone. Naloxone, which is also known by the brand name of Narcan, is a medication that reverses opioid overdoses. It is available most commonly as a nasal spray, but it does also come as an intramuscular injection. It's carried at pharmacies. You can get it without a prescription over the counter at stores like CVS, Rite Aid, and Walgreens. And it's very simple, safe, and legal for you to carry and use. You don't need any sort of special training to administer naloxone. There's instructions on the package that you can follow if you have this in your purse or your car. And in Washington State, we have laws called Good Samaritan laws, and they are in place to protect people who call 911 in the event of an overdose, and they're protected from prosecution of simple drug possession. So if you ever suspect that someone has overdosed, you should always call 911, and you should teach your teen the same. And hopefully, if they encounter something, that is the first thing that they do. And if naloxone is on hand, it can be administered immediately after or even while 911 is on speakerphone next to them. How does naloxone work? So, as I mentioned earlier, our brains have opioid receptors. So, naloxone is a type of medication called an opioid antagonist. And what that means is it basically blocks opioids from binding to those receptors in your brain. And so if someone were overdosing on opioids, naloxone would help to reverse those effects and they would wake up and start breathing again. There is not any effect on somebody who is not taking opioids, meaning if you gave naloxone to someone and they weren't overdosing, you can't hurt them. It also does not work to treat the effects of other drugs or alcohol. It only works for opioids like illicit fentanyl. Naloxone is not habit forming. There are no side effects. However, if you were to provide naloxone to somebody who is a regular user of opioids, they could go into withdrawal. So when they wake up, they may not feel well. It's important to stay with them while help is arriving just to help calm them down and let them know that you are there and you administer naloxone to help them wake up from an overdose. Something that you can do is have naloxone as a part of an emergency first aid kit. Having this on hand is not going to increase the likelihood that your teens try opioids, but it could save somebody's life in the event of an emergency. It's the most effective tool that we have to save lives, and you can make a big difference just by having this on hand. If you're looking for additional information, there are resources on wafriendsforlife.com/toolkits. There are three toolkits. There's a harm reduction, prevention partners, and a parent toolkit. So under the parent section, there's all sorts of brochures, conversation guides, videos, anything that you may need if you want additional details. We can also get copies of these brochures to you if you'd like a hard copy on hand to support a conversation that you're having with your teen. So feel free to reach out directly to me at ESD 112 if you would like access to that information. And other than that, thank you so much for being here. With your help, we can put an end to youth opioid overdoses. And I hope that this information was really valuable use of your time.